Alright, so today I'm going to install a wideband air fuel gauge on my 2019 Honda Monkey. So I have a few engine mods planned, and I want to do a better job at being able to monitor engine performance. So two things that I did. One is I replaced this COSO Mini 3 gauge. It previously just had battery voltage, ambient air temperature, and a clock, which was convenient because I wasn't planning on doing engine mods, and the clock was nice. But I've since switched this out to include the engine temperature, which is a much more important metric to be measuring. So the swap out of this was pretty straightforward, but the neat thing that I did was print a new holder for a 52 millimeter gauge. So in trying to figure out where I put a new gauge, I tried a lot of different options. I tried something similar to what I did up here for my tachometer. I tried to make a double gauge where I'd have one here and one here, but there just wasn't enough space with this engine, with this headlight fairing. If I didn't have it, I could put gauges all around it pretty easily, but I had just enough room for the single gauge up here. Anyway, tried different ideas. One is designing a clamp to go here. I made something that looked okay, but I didn't like how unintegrated it looked overall. But what I did end up building was this one here that mounts underneath the COSO mount, and it clamps in between the bar and the COSO gauge. So you can see here, it's very thin at the top of where it goes over the bar. It's only, I think, 2 mils thick. But the way that it's designed ends up being very rigid. So this is the final one here in place, and you can see that it's very solid. And this is actually the same one, just lower resolution print. So you can see how it works, but it clamps over the bar. So you can see here, it snaps this way. And then the gauge itself puts pressure evenly across the whole thing, so it's forcing it to clamp down and also making it so that it can't move up and down on the bar. Anyway, pretty cool solution, and this is the gauge that I've got that I'm going to put in. It's the wideband air fuel gauge from GlowShift to match the other gauge that I already have up here. And I'm going to use the O2 sensor port or bung that's already inside the Yoshimura RS3 exhaust that I have. So going to be able to keep a closer eye on the air fuel ratio, make sure that I'm not running too lean, and ultimately I'm probably going to get some more fuel management systems like the Power Commander 5 and the Auto Tune. Currently I just have the tunes with the reflashed ECU from Cameron Jones Racing, and I know they're also working on a flash to include the big bore kit, so I'm going to see what they come out with. But regardless, I'd like to be able to monitor what the air fuel ratio is as I work through that. So anyway, I'm going to open up this box. I imagine this install is going to be really simple, but we'll go ahead and get this open and get it on the bike. So just a quick unboxing of what comes in the kit. This, I believe, is the wire to run in between the sensor to their unit. A couple of different wires. In here, it's just a Bosch wideband air fuel sensor. And then here's the gauge itself. And I believe this also comes with a little control unit. So here's the gauge. This goes this way. And it also comes with I think a shroud for sunlight or something. And here's the little control unit that everything plugs into that will hook up in the back of the bike. Okay, so I've got the gauge slotted in. Actually, my measurements were pretty perfect. It's very tight, but slotted all the way in and let me dial it in so that the timing's perfect. The nice thing about this gauge also, it's very shallow. It's not very deep, so it doesn't hit the bolt here that goes down the main thread and the head column. So happy with the fitment there. I also just need to make sure that the timing of my handlebars are right, and then I'm going to screw these down, tighten them up, and put the little caps back on, and then we'll get the wiring figured out for the sensor. The handlebar mounts get torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. All right, now I can remove the blue tape that I just had here for alignment when I took the clamp and the handlebars off originally to get my 3D printed mount in there. So the installation procedure seems pretty simple. I'm going to put the control box back near the battery, and then from the actual gauge, one of the wires goes into that box. Out of that, it directly connects to the O2 sensor, and then the other line goes to power that I'm going to get out of the headlight bucket. So first thing I'm going to do is get the box into the space underneath the seat, and then we'll put the O2 sensor in, and then we'll get everything wired up to the gauge and the power out of the headlight bucket. Before I take the bolts out of the seat here, check out this awesome carbon fiber 3M material that I printed the monkey label in. I bought a vinyl printer, and so I've been doing all kinds of things, but I have this material that I used to wrap a couple of other things on the GTR. It was really thick and kind of difficult to cut, but I think it looks nice, especially accented against some of the other carbon fiber on the bike. All right, I think I have the wiring complete, so just wanted to do an overview. Outside of the sensor here, this wire goes all the way down here and runs through the body of the bike back to the back where I've got all the space in the battery box down here. The power comes from the front of the bike where I tapped into the switched on, the constant on. The switched on is the black wire with the yellow stripe. The constant on is the black wire with the white stripe. And then I didn't use the orange wire was for dimming when your headlight goes on, but since a motorcycle always has its headlight on, that's not going to work for me. And then ground, of course. One thing to note also, the wiring coloring on the harness says that it's supposed to be the yellow wire that goes to constant on, but in the kit it's a white wire that you need to go to the yellow wire. So I tested that and figured that out, but just FYI that you need to be aware of that. And then for the O2 sensor, and actually I have it off at the second because it says you need to take it out to calibrate it, but instead of running that up along this side of the bike like the stock O2 sensor does, I ended up running it along the left side of the bike, since the way that it's angled comes straight out this way, and then I just have it linked up into these wire clamps that are part of the temperature sensor through the bike and into the harness back here as well. And so I now just have this setting out here to test it, but here's the box where the O2 sensor goes into this portion. The power that I have coming from the front of the bike goes here, and the gauge itself that it sends the data out to comes right here. There's also provision for a data logger, and it comes with another port. I haven't set that up yet, but maybe I will in the future. So I'm going to go through the calibration process, then get the O2 sensor in, and I think the installation should be complete. Now the instructions say that this snake chasing itself display is for the sensor to warm up, and that takes about 30 seconds, and that there's a manual calibration process that needs to be done the first time. And that's also why it said it needs to be outside of the bung when you do it, so that's why it's pulled out at the moment. All right, so now it's going nuts. The engine's not actually on, but I think that means that the sensor's warmed up. Then it says, perform a manual calibration by pressing on the button on the controller for 3 seconds to initialize a controller sensor calibration sequence. The LED display on the gauge will show a 2 until the calibrating process is over. So I still have all of the cables back here out until I make sure everything's good, and then I'll tuck everything in neatly. This is the button that I'm going to depress for 3 seconds until it initializes the calibration. So I'll hold it down. So it's now in the calibrating process. And I guess that's it. So I'm going to screw the sensor back into the bung on the exhaust and fire it up and see what type of air-fuel ratio I'm getting on the display. All right, the O2 sensor is back into the exhaust, so I'm going to fire it up. I'll let it go through its warm-up sequence again. I don't know if I need to do that every time or not, but Since this is the first time, I'll wait till it starts showing me a reading. Here we go. All right, here's my much shortened version of the cable that goes in between the O2 sensor wire and the controller box. I got rid of all of this wire, which otherwise would have just been taking up space and weight in the compartment here. I think these two wires, the one that's running to the gauge and the other that's running to power, I'm just going to coil these up and put a zip tie around them because they're not going to take up too much space. Plus it gives me an option if I want to relocate this box at some point in the future. I don't know where else it would go, but it seems like more trouble than it's worth to adjust these. But yeah, this cable was super long and not worth it. What I did was cut the line off, and each individual line inside of this I soldered together and then heat shrinked inside, and then I have this separate piece of heat shrink that goes across the top to make a pretty professional finish to the way that this wire harness looks. So I'm going to get the rest of this in the bike, and I think I'm going to actually mount this up somewhere right around there. But so I like the way that the wires are all neat and tidy now, and yeah, still pretty impressed and happy with the way that this 3D mounted print came out, because being pretty limited on space and mounting locations, I think this is a pretty ideal location for this gauge. And I've actually seen something similar on the Grom and other bikes, but again, just not an application that for my particular situation works, so 3D printing my own solution worked best for me. All right, so let me fire this up and go for a ride.